You know that classic image of human evolution, right? That straight line of an ape slowly standing up and turning into a modern human. Well, it's time to throw that entire picture out the window. Today, we're diving into the tangled, messy, and honestly way more fascinating new story of where we came from.
So, the really big question we have to ask is this. Was our family tree ever that neat, simple tree with a single trunk leading right to us? For decades, that's pretty much what all the evidence pointed to. But as we're about to see, the science has gone through an absolute earthquake of a change. So, the key to understanding this new picture is really about changing the metaphor. We've got to move away from that idea of a clean, branching tree, where Homo sapiens is just the perfect little twig at the very top. The new science shows us something that looks much more like a braided stream, with multiple channels of humanity flowing across the landscape, sometimes splitting apart, and then, crucially, merging back together again.
Okay, so let's start with that simple story. For a long time, the main theory was called the recent African origin model. And it was a really clear, dramatic tale of our species' triumph. The theory went something like this. Around 200,000 years ago, in a kind of Garden of Eden in East Africa, our species was born. Then, in one big wave, we swept out of Africa and completely replaced every other ancient human out there, people like the Neanderthals, without any, interaction. It was a clean sweep. But then, clues started popping up that just didn't fit that neat story. The first major crack in that old story didn't actually come from genetics. It came from a fossil skull found in a place nobody expected with a date that just shocked everyone. This discovery at a site called Jebel Irhoud in Morocco just blew the timeline wide open. It pushed the origin of our species back by a massive 100,000 years, all the way to about 315,000 years ago. And it wasn't just older, it was in North Africa, thousands of miles from that supposed East African cradle. All of a sudden, our beginnings looked less like a single dot on a map and more like something that was happening all across the continent. So when you actually look at the evidence for this new Pan-African idea, it's pretty compelling. You've got Jebel Irhoud in the northwest, our oldest known fossils. Then you have Homo kibish in the east, which we used to think were the oldest. And then way down south, the Florisbad skull shows modern features from 260,000 years ago. Early members of our species were literally all over the place, evolving in different groups that would sometimes connect and mix their genes. Our cradle wasn't some little garden, it was the entire African continent.
But here's where the story gets even wilder. See, as our ancestors were evolving across Africa, Eurasia was already full of other kinds of humans. We knew about the Neanderthals, of course, but the next big discovery revealed a completely new and mysterious branch of our family.
This is just one of the most incredible stories in all of modern science. Researchers managed to sequence DNA from a tiny fragment of a pinky bone they found in Denisova Cave in Siberia. They probably weren't expecting to find much of anything, but instead, they found a genome that wasn't Neanderthal and it wasn't modern human. They had discovered an entirely new group of ancient humans, the Denisovans.
And get this, the Denisovans weren't just one single group. It turns out they were this whole complex network of different populations spread all across Asia. Even more amazing, their DNA shows that they had interbred with an even more ancient human group, a super archaic ghost population we only know about from its genetic signature. And then, they passed bits of that ancient DNA on to us. Our family tree was officially becoming a tangled web.
So, if our ancestors met all these other human groups, what happened? Remember, the old theory said total replacement, but the new evidence, which is written in the DNA of pretty much every non-African person alive today, tells a very different story: assimilation.
Just look at this. This chart shows the genetic leftovers of those ancient meetings. If your ancestors came from outside of Africa, you have about 2% Neanderthal DNA. Right now, if you have Melanesian ancestry from places like Papua New Guinea, you have an additional 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA. And new studies have found that some West African populations carry DNA from yet another ghost archaic group, one we've never even found a fossil of, but whose DNA is still alive in people today. Our genomes aren't pure, they're mosaics.
But why did these ancient genes stick around? Well, there's a fantastic reason, and it's called adaptive introgression. Think of it like an evolutionary shortcut. Instead of waiting thousands of years for your own species to evolve a solution to a new challenge, like a new climate or a new diseases, you can just borrow the solution from the locals who have already spent millennia adapting.
And some of these borrowed genes were absolute game changers.
The most famous example is the EPAS1 gene. It's what allows many Tibetans to live comfortably in the thin air of high altitudes. And that amazing adaptation? It wasn't a new mutation in Homo sapiens. It was a direct genetic gift from the Denisovans, who are already living and thriving up there.
Another critical gift was all about our immune systems. See, Neanderthals and Denisovans have been living in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years, building up defenses to all the local germs and viruses. By interbreeding, our ancestors basically got a massive software update for their immune systems, helping them survive in these new, challenging lands.
Okay, so let's pull all the pieces of this incredible detective story together and see what this new picture of us really looks like.
So let's go back to where we started. On the left, you've got that simple, neat tree. But now we know that our species emerged from this network of different populations all across Africa. And then, as we expanded across the world, we didn't just replace other humans. We met them. We mixed with them. We absorbed parts of who they were into our own story. That simple tree on the left just dissolves and it becomes the beautiful, complex, braided stream on the right.
There's this quote from the research that just sums it all up perfectly. It highlights our deep African roots, but it also shows that our secret to becoming a global species was, in part, our ability to mix. We didn't conquer the world by ourselves, we did it by weaving other human stories right into our own DNA.
I think the biggest takeaway here is that the story of us is so much richer and more complex than we ever thought. The ghosts of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and who knows who else, they aren't just haunting the past. They are us. They're an integral part of who we are today, written into our very code. And it just leaves you with this incredible question. As our technology gets better and better, who else are we going to find hiding in our own DNA?